When I saw Laura's work and what she does in the world, I was so taken and enamored. And I hope that you got to check out the links. I hope that you got to see what she's up to. She's doing really beautiful work. And I'm not going to speak too much about her, but what I will tell you about her is that she has been storytelling and teaching for many, many years. She performs worldwide in theaters and locally in house concerts. She also teaches day-long and two-day-long intensives. Her first book, Our Secret Territory, has been called, are you ready? The best ever written book about storytelling. I love that. I can't believe I can't wait to read it. Um, and she just finished her book this morning called Wild Rose, summoning the restoration of the world. And I'm gonna hand over the reins now and just allow her to speak for herself. As always, I'll just tell you one thing that Laura said, that she is very open to your ongoing questions, so we don't have to wait for Q&A at the end. So I'll be keeping an eye on all of you. So as you have questions, you can put them up, or Laura also, we oftentimes will put questions in the chat box. And if you click on that chat box, it'll come up and be there for you.
So, thank you, Leah. And it's particularly wonderful to be here because of Dina, who has been a huge influence and mentor and friend for many, many years. And she and I spend a lot of time talking about the power of story. So I thought, in a way, for you to come to know me, rather than my giving my spiel about storytelling as a sacred event, that I would tell two very small stories. And I'm not that used to telling stories on Zoom. So excuse me that I can't really smell your energy, but I'll do the best I can. I've been telling stories since 1967. And the first time I told a story, it was an absolute accident in Central Park. I had dropped out of graduate school after 3 days, the 1970s. And I had joined a theater company, a sort of alternative theater company. And of course, everyone in that theater company was a famous sort of off Broadway actor, except for me. So when our money arrived on a Friday, it was actually, I got something like $13 for my week. And they had, like something like 700, which at the time was a lot of money. So Julie Bavasso, a great director, insisted that I teach the children of actors and actresses in New York City. And really, I've never been able to memorize a single word in all these years. So I engaged all these kids, excuse me for my New York sounds happening here. Nobody ever calls me really on that phone. So it's a scam. And, but anyway, I took these kids to Central Park, and I had them acting out fairy tales because I was a sort of obsessive kid who read Russian fairy tales as a child and had a Romanian mother who would put me to sleep by telling me these fantastic and really dark and fabulous stories that I could visualize and then fall asleep dreaming of crystal mountains. But during that, and this is not the story that I'm telling you, but during that event of telling a story, coming from experimental theater in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, trying to break down all form, everything that we had been searching for in our work happened in that odd storytelling event. It was 1967. Something happened between myself and the audience that really shook my world. And I understood that, first of all, this story that seemed like a fantastic story that put me to bed and sort of excited me was much more than I thought. And that this kind of confluence of energy and imagination and emotion that happened between my audience and myself was almost like a mystical experience. And I wanted to know what that was. And it brought me to the Museum of Natural History, where I was sort of a pet of people like Margaret Mead and Colin Turnbull and others, because I wanted to be a storyteller in the really traditional sense of the word. So I was put in a rare library, behind the library, seated cross-legged for years, reading missionary journals and ethnographies and learning stories and learning to drum from Native Americans who would come. And I became the storyteller in residence in the museum for close to 15 years in the People's Center. And anytime there was not somebody from a culture to tell a story, I was brought in to tell a story from that culture. And so there was something that I was learning about this relationship, this engagement that I understood was necessary in the world. And it's how I began this, what my father thought of as a sort of horrible fad. And my mother, however, was quite interested in. So that's a little background. And also you have a sense of my voice. And I want to tell you very, 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 very old, tiny myth. It was recorded by one of the last Bushman speakers in South Africa in 1901. And it's a story of the time when there was neither light or dark, and the world was gray. And between compounds, there were fires burning so that people could see one another and food could be cooked. There would be warmth. But there came a time when the fires were burning and dying down. And a girl in that early time saw in the gray ash the tiny glittering embers in the dying fire. And she put her bare hand in the ash, lifted up the embers, and threw them into the sky. And she made the stars and reignited the world. Second story. And this is just a tiny fragment. But I grew up in Brooklyn, and I lived in the old farmhouse renovated after World War II. And we had an enormous, chaotic backyard. And there were flowers bordering huge eulalia trees that had a terrible smell, broken down trees that lay in the grass, thick grass, and one single scraggly rose bush. And around it, my mother had cleaned and flattened the dirt. And every day she sent me out to water the rose bush. And she was like the priestess of the rose bush, and I was her acolyte. And maybe there would be 2 roses that would bloom in the season. And once when I was in the attic, the 3rd floor of this old, this formidable house, playing school or hospital, in which I starred in every role, I took an old Torah book down and opened it, and there was a small envelope, maybe, this big. And there were 3 black and white small photographs. And the one photograph that I was completely intrigued by was a photograph from the back of my grandma Molly's garden, a few streets away from us. And it was filled with a plethora of rose bushes, small rose bushes, vines growing up on fences, hundreds of petals, 5 petals, yellow, red. You could see the vibrancy of these roses even in the black and white photo. And in front, behind a silk curtain, was the figure of my grandmother, almost beshadowed. And I asked my mother, why did Grandma have so many rose bushes? And my mother said, that was your grandmother's Romania, which is how I came to write a 350-page book on the wild rose and Romanian fairy tale, to understand this connection to the past and this passion that my mother had for this old rose bush. So what I would like to do is really, in the immediacy, is let you divide into pairs and just have a 5-minute conversation about what these stories remind you of. It doesn't have to be an actual sense or mirror to it, but whatever came up by listening to those stories, what did it remind you of in your own life today, listening to those stories? And you could discuss that with your partner, and then we could start.
They have 5 minutes to speak to what stories in their own lives surfaced through the listening to those 2 stories. Is that?
What does it remind them of? Not whether they like it or not an analysis or what it meant to listen, but just what that story reminded them of. The girl who put her hands in the burning embers and brought the world back to light. And my mother and my grandmother and my life connected through the rose bush. I mean, why I named my book Summoning the Restoration of the World is because listening to a story, whether it is a true story or a mythic tale, it always summons from other, sometimes a plethora of multiple layers of sensory memory and associations. So it's good to understand that the story is always bigger than the story that we think we're telling. And it's, you know, I realize as a storyteller, I have to do a lot of work. The story is for myself at first. But really, when you tell a story, it's always for the other. It's always about engagement, relationship, and a sort of reciprocity that's completely ordinary and totally imagine driven, which is the energy of space into spirit and nature. So it's always that alive place that's opened in the listener. And these memories are precious, that are, an image calls for an image. And when you have that, then, and we'll go further creating stories in our little time together. But when you get off this evening, write that down. And write down, don't worry about it being a story, just all the, and this is for everyone, the visceral sensory memories of place and color and what you remember. It doesn't have to be a story that has, beginning, middle, and end, but just harvest that memory, because it will come forth for you and you'll find the essence of the story, which is much needed in the world today and in your heart. course. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, that's what we're doing, becoming sacred storytellers. I think that's, the sort of inside agenda of of your class, probably.
Mm. Mm.
Reconnect
Yes. Yes.
in every way, in the present, with what is can never be destroyed.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
It's just a belief system that has us thinking it can be destroyed. So in these days, becoming a sacred storyteller is not about collecting stories, but about recognizing what these stories are essentially holding within them, and by sharing them, what happens in the world, not only to the person we tell the story to, but in the world itself. Because it's energy. It's opening up channels of energy. So we are shifting the environment. It is a magic act of kind of alchemical communion. Beautiful. And the Scottish have unbelievable stories.
Yeah, totally.
You look Scottish all of a sudden now.
That's actually what inspired me to start to study storytelling, was going to Scotland. I went on it was just a tour, but this young man who was leading tours in Edinburgh was the most amazing storyteller, like the best day of my whole 3 months.
Because it was a day with the universe inside of it.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Well, one of the best storytelling centers in the world is in Edinburgh.
Yes, yeah.
Storytelling is fabulous. Anyway, thank you so much. But you should write down about that day, about your journey,
Yeah,
and your mother's hydrangeas.
absolutely. I made some notes.
Oh, beautiful. Ooh. Wonderful. How are we doing? How is everybody? You're nodding.
Seeing thumbs up. Lots of thumbs up, lots of nodding.
No, I just wanted to read you something, because I know, Leah, you started with a quote. And when I was thinking about this today, when I was in Nepal, this was, I don't know, like in the 1980s. And I don't know if you can see this book, and I'll write it in the little chat. I went to the Mandala bookstore, and I was actually leading a tour of female sacred sites. And the woman who ran this sort of guiding journeys got ill. And so it was left to me. So Miranda Shaw, who wrote Passionate Enlightenment and all these amazing books on Nepalese gods and goddesses and Tibetan goddesses, was in Nepal at the time. And she's a friend of mine, and a great mountain climber who takes photographs for the Dalai Lama, Ian Baker. So I all of a sudden was able to hire them. And we ditched the whole tour of sort of conventional sacred sites. And we went to the mountains to see women who had dakinis, who had trees growing from their palms. And we climbed to the top of ruins and told myths about the different, deities, and a remarkable time. So I went to the Mandala bookstore, and there was a book on narrations, symbolic languages, and the Bun tradition in ancient Tibet. I must say that 75% of the book is impenetrable to me. It's all charts and things that I cannot understand. But the first 2 chapters I have read 100 times, because it's everything I needed to learn about the earliest realization of what storytelling was. And it says that the ancient drung, these are the narrations that were told, this is pre-Tibetan Buddhist, were used as marvelous means to awaken deep spiritual knowledge. That these stories had the capacity and the important function to communicate the most profound principles of early Buddhism. So it was about the nature of mind. And there are all these like fantastic little parables about kings, and suddenly you realize that these stories that we have been told are kiddie stories or psychological journeys only are embedded with profound spiritual knowledge that is deeply personal and timeless for us all. So I wanted to just bring that in because today, thinking about you, Leah, I took this book, which is getting quite tattered and I can't find it again, and reread those 2 chapters. I thought, how can I prepare for sacred storytelling, if not to think about the roots of this art form? It was the way that culture was kept, and culture is not only the outer forms, but as Martin Shaw says in your quote that you have there, the waking up that then defines us as cultural beings. So I'll just tell you another little story, and then I would love to, time's flying, to be able to take you through a tiny process of creating a story. Would you like to do that? You can like wave your fingers and stick your tongue out. Okay. So this is a story for the gardeners among you. And it's actually from Iran. So it's wonderful to bring it in today. There was a judge. Are you following this so far? And he decided to become a gardener. So he used all of his learned, scholarly aspects that he had developed as a judge in order to learn to make a perfect garden. And so he read everything, he studied everything, and he measured the garden, and he knew the proper instruments and how deep to dig, how far apart the seeds, and on and on and on. He paid obeisance to what he learned to make this excellent garden. But when it bloomed, it was 50% weeds. So he destroyed it and he started again, and he created another garden with even more attention to his studies. And there was 80% weeds. So he realized he should go to the royal gardener, who was a very old man, and ask his advice. And so he went to the gardener, he asked his advice, and the gardener said, I think I can help you. Just describe everything that happened. And so he laboriously described his process. And of course, isn't that what we always want to hear? That someone can fix it or help us. And he said, I know what you should do. You should learn to love weeds. So I've never done this on a Zoom call, but since we're involved with the impossible, we'll do it. And now that I see your smiles and your fingers and I've heard your voices, I feel our connection. And for me, the connection is everything. So what I would like you to do before we break again into little rooms is think for a minute, because your visualizing is now stirred up, of a place in your childhood where you felt completely safe, where you felt complete happiness, even if it's sad, a place that you loved in your childhood. It could be indoors, it could be outdoors, it could be on a New York subway, it could be under the bed, it could be on a street or a mountain, wherever, just a place. And when you decide on that place, and if you have several, just choose one. And it doesn't matter what happened there, just the place itself. Just put your hand on your head when you have it. Okay. So what I would like you to do in your room, your chat room with your partner, is you're going to have 4 minutes each. This is really generous. And what you're going to do, and don't cheat, of course, is you're going to the best of your capacity describe that place to your partner. Not what you did there or whether you liked it or not, or nothing that happened, just like the facts Friday, just the place. And try to describe it. Was it, almost like a photograph that you're seeing in front of you. And partner, your job is to really listen and see if you can visualize the place that's being described to you. So I think we'll probably give you a heads up after 3 minutes so that you know that you're coming to a close. And sometimes in the beginning, you can't see it clearly, but when you actually begin to define the details, the color, the texture, the feeling, the shape, if there's furniture or trees, if there are mountains, just try to be very specific. And later we'll talk about what that specificity has to do with story and the act of remembering visually and viscerally. So you up for this? Great.
Thank you.
So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to a different partner, and we're going to do the same thing again with the new partner. And by repeating the details visually, you will discover that you might remember more, or you might organize the description of the place more fully. But your job is to allow your partner to see that place, whether it is the inner place or this visual place, visceral, real place that you remember. Again, try to hold yourself back from being a character in your story, or saying whether you liked it or not, or telling what you did there. If we have time at the end, you'll be able to do that. But there's a reason to do this so particularly with detail that has everything to do with the nature of story and communication and healing. So bon voyage. This time, time is so uncanny for some reason this evening, but so it is. You'll have, why don't we go for 4 minutes again? And you can use your hands if you need to sort of see that place, just sort of flash it, boom. And then just see it, and best you can describe it to your partner. Everything, even what the air felt like, the color of the air, the color of the walls or the mountains or the grass, the wing of a bird, the texture of the floor, whatever it is that you need, color, shape, form, the refrigerator that was over to the left that was white with two doors, whatever you could remember. You're not telling the story, so don't worry about it like having some fantastic, it does already. But so 4 minutes each. Have a wonderful time. Listener is really listening. Okay. We think that listening is the most natural thing in the world, and it is. But we have to learn to listen. And listening, like seeing, the more you deeply listen, the more you hear so much and visualize. It's almost like the inside of your body becomes really sensitized and perceptions open. So that's really important. I'm glad you brought it up. Wonderful to know that. That is the tool of the storyteller. We're not just repeating the events, but it takes that deep listening and true seeing to begin to allow the story to come alive inside of us. Then
Laura,
we
there's a beautiful tale from the Lakota that I once heard, which was, you just made me think of it in terms of that seeing part, that part of storytellers seeing, we can call them audience, the co-creators, the participants, those people that we're in story with. When they said that when the Lakota elders would come to town, that's when the storytellers would come to that village. And if there was a child that was acting out, the punishment would not be to banish them outside of the teepee. The punishment was to not see them. And that's really always stayed with me in terms of that specifically told in context to the storyteller of how much we are aware of. I hate to simplify, it's oversimplify with these words, saying there's so much power that storytellers have when they see their audience, and that audience feels that connection. And I really heard you speak so much over our time together about how you're speaking about this connection, this bond that you're creating in story. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about the ways that you've come to preparing your audience to receive, to listen, like, because that listening where you're not just listening for the story, but you're listening to the mythos, that you're listening to the memories that are being recaptured all through the story that you gave. And I think that's, yeah,
You know,
prepare people for that.
this last exercise, which will bring that more into a visceral experience for all of us. And then when we talk about it, it will be based on our experience, so it won't be theoretical. And so if you can return to the exact same partner who you were just with in the second telling, and those of you who were the listeners, each of you were listeners, your task is now, so you have a big decision, who goes first, who goes second. But whoever goes first is going to tell what you heard, not what you think the story's about, but there was once a boy or there was once a girl in third person who loved this place or went to this place, and then just describe the place that your partner described to you the best you can. And partner, don't correct them. Just let them do it. But your job as the teller in third person is as if this is the most urgent, important folk tale. Maybe you've been in prison or you haven't been allowed to talk to each other, and you have this 4 minutes in which you can say something. And so 5 days ago, somebody told you about this place. And now what you're going to do, your utter gift to save their life, is to say, there was once a little girl who had a garden behind her house. And it was square shaped. And just tell them back the place. Don't explain anything. Don't try to make it more than it was. Just the deep urgency of giving somebody back their story. Everything will inform your voice. There will be so much more to it. So I'm not going to waste any more time. So you're going to go back to the same, and you're going to just leap into it. Do the best you can. There are no mistakes in this whatsoever. Only things to discover. So you just take care of your partner. Start by looking at each other. Take a second. In fact, let's just see each other now for 1 minute. And then partner 1, then partner 2. And you'll be signaled so that if you haven't finished, that's okay. So it's just the details, not whether you liked it, whether it felt good, or what happened there. Just the place is the whole story for now. Okay, enjoy yourself.
Yes, these are our moments where we just want to take a few moments to do our ritual ending of just anchoring in, what are we taking away from this class? What do we want to anchor in? And Laura really was rather extraordinary in the way that I'll just say I'm walking away with this very deep transmission of what it is to be with someone who holds story in every breath and every bit of your bones. Like, I feel like so much came through that can't be spoken in a couple of words, and maybe you didn't say, but wow, I just received so much. So I just want to give us an opportunity to speak to, what did you receive that maybe wasn't spoken to, because there was a lot conveyed and shared and lived in the realm of story. I'm also going to ask you to be very succinct. One word, one phrase, so we can get as many voices in the next 3 minutes. Listen.
A visceral sense of speaking, of telling and listening.
Amy.
The importance of spaciousness, not just the words, but the silence between them.
I have a renewed sense of longing.
Everything takes place somewhere.
Story Sherpa.
I liked the quote, tasting the heart of listening.
Transcending all form to shape the world anew.
I've been relating to the power of story as a conjuring. And now I feel I've expanded that understanding of conjuring to also be a summoning and an incanting.
Brenda.
I like the notion of mining the memories to create story.
Kelly, are you waiting?
I'm reveling in the intimacy of the authentic sharing and the deep listening.
All right. Thank you all for such a sweet, beautiful couple of hours. And I don't know what happened, but time
Wow.
It just, right? It was odd. I'm just gonna say it's odd. I've never seen it quite move like that before. So I'm going to tell you two things, and then Laura offered to end us with a story, so how to confuse that. Some very exciting news for those of you who are in the Bay Area. I would say mark February 15th on your calendar, because those among you who are in the performance intensive will be doing Medea's Dream, the story of love, betrayal, and forgiveness, a ceremony and ritual, an event like you might never have experienced before. So I just put the Eventbrite up there, and you can see that. And then I'll also just tell you that there is another course that is being offered if you want to take a really deep dive into working with story in ritual and ceremony and as a rites of passage. And we're working with one story a month moving forward for the year. So that's, and you as students of Speak the Spark get the permanent early bird special. So you can do just one or many, but it's there. So if you've seen any of my newsletters, it's there. I'll tell you that Laura also does personal coaching, and she has a mentorship program. So you will see her her email, and I'll send that out to you afterwards. And I think without, oh, she just put it into our chat box. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it back.
Tell this, if I can tell this story in 2 minutes. I was working with a group of children ages from 5 to 17, telling them the Lenape creation myth. And in the group, I began going around so each child could say their name. And I came to this one boy and I said, "What's your name?" And he said, "Poophead." And so the other kids all start giving his name. And I said, no, it's okay. You want to be called Poophead, but you know, I might be uncomfortable. Can I call you PH? So he agreed. And everything that I did, he tried to disrupt. And at one point in the last session, the kids were drawing monsters because Sky Woman's daughter gave birth to twins, Good Mind and Bad Mind. And Bad Mind created monsters while Good Mind was creating the world. And he, Poophead, while listening, discovered that you could attach all the magic markers to each other, and he was wielding them like a sword. He had two, like some kind of weird Tibetan demon. And he then stood up, filled it himself, and everybody moved away. And so I said, PH, has one of the monsters entered your body? And he said, yes. And I said, I have never seen a monster dance. Would you let the monster dance? And then he began turning and then leaping, wielding these sword-like magic markers until they exploded over the room and everyone hugged the wall. And he began to leap and jump in this kind of complete, amazing dance. And I said, Poophead, in our story, every monster had a heart. Ask your monster, where is the heart in your body? And he said, it's in my ear. And I said, I'm going to talk to the monster's heart. And I said, Poophead, I love you. Poophead, I love you. And then I asked, through signaling, all the children and adults in the room, and they began beating their feet on the ground like a drum, saying, Poophead, I love you. Poophead, I love you. And his dance began to be softer and slower, like a great Tai Chi master. And then slowly, slowly, he sank to the ground. And when he opened his eyes, he told me his name. He said, my name is Solomon. That's utterly beautiful. That's what happens when we live inside a story. Poophead, I love you.
I'm taking us all off mute so we can say thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Laura.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Laura, beautiful,
Thank you.
beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful,
Oh,
beautiful.
so healing. So
Mahalo.
Beautiful.
Thank you. You're amazing.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh.
This is when we say the slow goodbye.
Bye.
Well, we don't really want to let go
Bye.
because we're still in that story a little bit.
Yeah, and to all of you, such beautiful medicine.
Mm.
We need storytelling more than stories.
Mm.
Be well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Laura.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.